Hey, so today we are joined by Miss Waldock from the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, and she's the head of education there. So thank you very much for agreeing to this interview.
My pleasure, Michael.
So firstly, for those people who don't know what the Sydney Symphony Orchestra is, can you give us a brief description of what it is?
Yes, it's Australia's full-time orchestra based in Sydney. We live at the Opera House. That's our residence place and where we do most of our concerts. There are 100 permanent musicians, about an additional 40 or 50 casual players, plus 40 academic staff, administrative staff.
So how important do you think the Sydney Symphony Orchestra is to the community?
Well, culturally I think it's very important because it is one of the performing ensembles that lives in the iconic cultural centre of Australia, the Opera House. We have a big responsibility to the community beyond Sydney. We travel and tour through New South Wales. Our brass players have just this weekend been in Wogan Valley doing activities. We do activities for all ages, for school kids, for adults, public concerts, concerts of pop music, concerts of game music, films are shown, the orchestra plays along. So we've got quite a big presence and try to provide entertainment and education for a whole bunch of people in Sydney and New South Wales.
So onto leadership, which is what our project entails. So personally, what do you think leadership is, and how important do you think leadership is in any group?
Every group, the way people work, they usually need someone to lead them. Otherwise, it's either a schmozzle or too many strong-willed people fighting each other, which is often the case of the orchestra. The leadership, I think, is essential, and I think the key qualities of leadership are leading by example, not expecting people to do things you wouldn't do, to be responsible, to be receptive to other people's ideas, to be prepared to talk about things with people, but to also be prepared to do the hard calls and to call people on things when it's not good enough and to admit when you do it wrong yourself.
So what sort of leaders are there in the SSO?
In the SSO we have the managing director who leads the entire company. We have a board of directors with a chairman who steers the sort of financial planning of the company. In the orchestra itself, we have a concert master, Dean Olding, who is the leader of the orchestra. Each section of the orchestra has a leader. So there's the leader, or what we call principal flute, and each department within the orchestra, like education or production or the library or accounting, box office, we've all got our own leadership. And then the orchestra is run by an executive team, which is the leaders of each of the sections within the administration.
So what led you to become the head of education of the SSO?
Well, I was a school teacher for 20 years, and Richard Gill, who's the artistic director of the education program, suggested I apply for the job when it came up. And I was interested in the notion of not just having my classroom at Sydney Grammar School as my only classroom, but New South Wales became my classroom. Then Australia became my classroom as we do things around the country, and now in the last 2 years I've been teaching in Korea and China for the orchestra in our international programs. So yeah, because I'm a teacher and I like music and I play the violin, so that's probably why.
So what sort of roles do you have?
My role in the orchestra is to manage every facet of the education program. We have a developing artist person who oversees the Symphonia, which is our mentoring orchestra, the fellowship program, which is a full-time chamber music program training pre-professional players. So what that means is advanced tertiary students audition and work with the orchestra, sometimes as casuals, sometimes just in the Symphonia, which is the orchestra that delivers all our schools and education programs in the regional touring. So I work with him to run that program. I work with the education coordinator to convene the production of materials that support our schools concerts. We program the schools concerts. We run about 7 weeks of schools concerts each year. We have the Meet the Music series and the Discovery series. We have about 25 teacher training days. So all these things I have to oversee. I've also got a box office member of staff, and he deals with all the schools and the thousands and thousands of school tickets that get sold.
So how do you think your role embodies the qualities and ideas of leadership?
Well, I'm very good at negotiating. I have a team of very creative people that have to work within a larger organisation, and it's my job to make sure that education is fairly represented at various levels within the company, to make sure that education understands the whole direction of the company, to make sure that our programs are what we claim that they are. We claim that they're world class, that they're unique in Australia, that they're quality, that they're second to nothing else that's happening in Australia at the moment. And so that's my job, to that quality assurance. And also to keep thinking of new ways of reinventing the education program, of checking on the professional development of my staff and just their general working conditions, to keep an eye on everybody. And, you know, being a conduit, I guess, between the education people and the board and the managing director.
So how important is your role to the community?
To the Sydney Symphony community or to the wider...
The wider community.
My role to the wider community? Well, it's an interesting question, that, because I don't think that anybody in a company as large as ours, in a program that is as big as ours, the Sydney Symphony's overall activities, out of those whole year activities, 1/3 are education. So I guess in that context, it's a very important role. However, education couldn't work on its own. We have to have the musicians of the orchestra and the librarians and the box office people and all that. So in terms of my role to the community, it's important that I do my job properly so that the schools can rely on us to enrich their programs and to give their children really good quality concert experiences, and to provide materials they can teach in the classroom before they come to the concerts, and to think of all the regional cons and all the relationships we have there, and to give their students opportunities whenever we're travelling through those towns. So my job, I think, for the community is important, but maybe more so for the schooling and the local musical community. I think that, you know, Granny on the farm out in Wagga would be delighted to know the orchestra was coming to Wagga, but what I did as part of that is probably of little consequence to Granny, though I'm sure she's happy if her grandchild goes.
So what do you think must be done for SSO to continue to promote music in the community?
Well, we need to keep touring. We need to keep a physical presence. We need to keep playing in the Domain. We need to keep playing out at Parramatta Park. We need to be playing concerts that are relevant to all age groups. We need to have an internet presence. We need to be providing things that the community want. So that means we have a responsibility in terms of training up the next generation of conductors, of composers, of performers. We have to be enhancing music programs in this country by the quality material that we can do that they can't do in a classroom. You can't in a classroom listen to a piece of music by Beethoven and say, listen just to what it sounds like with just the flute and clarinet, unless the whole class can play and you've got an orchestra in your classroom. And these are the sorts of things we can help teachers unpack, and we can extend what they do. In terms of the adult education and the sorts of concerts that unpack music for everyone, I think that's also something that we have to keep doing, and we have to keep finding new ways to get people to connect with classical music. Because as we know, in this country we're big sport people, but we're not always big cultural people. And so many times, last week we played the music of Tandun, the guy who wrote the music for Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So we had a hugely different audience to the people that will come and hear a Brahms symphony. You know, and we have to keep finding ways to connect with all aspects of the community, I think, because taxpayers' dollars help to fund our organisation, so we have a responsibility.
Finally, do you think there's a difference between musical leadership and, say, educational leadership?
I think there is, in that musical leadership in the orchestra is what we would call the artistic direction. And what that job is to select the music that the orchestra will play over the whole year, to select conductors who will inspire the musicians as well as bring a really good performance to the concert. Whereas the education leadership is geared at a slightly different clientele, in that it's really up to me to think of ways to extend the people we're training and ways of helping teachers and schools and the other members of the community, the regional conservatoriums. We have a lot of work when we travel around with the regional cons, with the Sydney Con, the universities, providing pathways for people. And so, yeah, I think there is a difference. It's just that my job is tied to people who are interested in music, or music is the commodity that I can help those people use in there, whereas musical leadership is more about leadership of the ensemble and direction of the performing parts of the ensemble.
Thank you very much for
My pleasure.
agreeing to this.
Thanks for coming to the City Recital Centre.